prefer Mr. Beck or John Beck? What do you prefer me to call you?
Well, you can call me JB. That's what most people call me,
All right.
JB, John Beck.
Well,
Whatever.
I never studied with you, so and I don't believe we've maybe met in person only but once. So I didn't want to proceed with familiarity that I didn't quite have just yet. So,
Okay.
well, John Beck or JB, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me today. I've known of you since most sort of on the front of my brain, I've known of you since I joined because of Jason Truding and Jason telling me about studying with you in the Eastman School of Music, and then learning more about sort of the history of folks who have come through that program and worked with you. And then I saw you at a PASIC retirement party. Oh, can you hear me okay still?
Yep.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, I saw
that
that there was a PASIC retirement party, and you were asked to give a sort of keynote speech, and you said something along the lines. The thing that stuck with me was some of you have said that it wasn't always very exciting to study with me, but you all weren't all that inspirational all the time either. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, of course, but it hit me in that moment of like, of course, this is a person who's been teaching for 50 years or something, and of course, I've only taught for 15, and not every lesson is the most exciting thing I've ever sat in on. So, all of that said, I just kind of wanted to get to know a little bit more about you as a person, as a teacher, as a player, and sort of get to know a little bit more about what got you into doing what you did for your entire career, and are still doing to some extent. Would you mind just sort of starting from the beginning and tell me a little bit what got you into music as a kid?
Well, my entrance into the music business, percussion business, drum business was unusual. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania called Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
The only notoriety that town has is its Bucknell University at
Mm-hmm.
one end of the town, and the Eastern Federal Penitentiary at the other end of the town. So, but in the town, there was a fire company, and they had a fife and drum corps. And my inspiration came from the fife and drum corps. And my best friend's father played snare drum in that little fife and drum corps.
Mm-hmm.
And down the street from where I lived was another snare drummer who played in that fife and drum corps. So at 10 years old, I said I wanted to play a drum.
Mm.
So I took lessons from the gentleman down the street. His name was Oscar Angstedt, and he painted houses. That was his job in the world. He was a house painter. He was a good drummer,
Mm-hmm.
not a skilled drummer, but he knew how to play what they needed to play in the fife and drum corps. So he said, "Okay, John, I'll give you lessons."
No, sorry to
So
interrupt. So you're 10 years old, and just if you don't mind me asking, what year is this? I mean, you don't look a day over 27, but I just wanted to be clear here.
Well, let's see. I'm 87 now.
Uh-huh.
That had to be. I was born in 33, so that had to be 43.
Okay. I mean, I'm sort of I am not a historian, but I'm fascinated by the history around World War II, and one of my regrets growing up was I didn't ask my grandfather more questions about that time. I was young enough not to even know that history was a thing that mattered. And I now, as a 40-year-old person, I'm really regretting that I didn't speak to my grandfather about what it was like to be alive during that time. But anyway, so it's interesting to me to know that 1943, World War II is like in full swing, and the U.S. is in the war, and you are in Lewisburg deciding that you wanted to play snare drum. Just to put all of this in some larger context.
That's true. And yes, I actually remember, Josh, I remember when the Second World War started. I was at my aunt's house, and we heard on the radio let's see, the president at the time, Roosevelt, said, we are at war. And I remember that statement very vividly. But did the war mean much to me at 10 years old, 8 years? No, not a whole lot. But yes, that's when I came from. I was born in 1933. So in 43, I picked up a pair of drumsticks and went down the street to my neighbor's house, and he gave me a lesson. My first lesson was how to hold the drumsticks. Mm-hmm. The second lesson was how to put a skin head onto a flesh hoop. So in case your drum head broke, if you didn't know how to put a skin head back on that snare drum, what good is it if you had a pair of drumsticks? You couldn't play it anyway. So one lesson was how to hold the sticks. Second lesson was how to put a skin head on a flesh hoop. And the third lesson was how to read music.
Pardon my ignorance, but we're plastic. When was the sort of advent of the plastic drum head? I mean, I imagine calf heads were pretty ubiquitous in 1943 compared to plastic heads. Am I right in that?
Yeah, I think plastic heads came in the 50s. Oh, wow, sometime okay. in the 1950s. I don't know the exact date, but I do remember plastic heads being invented and tried. And sure, you can imagine if I was out playing a parade and it was raining, the skin head sort of turned into like a wet newspaper.
Right.
And I didn't even go through a swimming pool and come out the other end, and the plastic head was still sounding pretty darn good.
Right.
That was the time. So this gentleman gave me 13 lessons. And then he said, John, I don't know anymore. You have to go find another teacher. I said, okay. And I found another teacher in my hometown in Lewisburg. And the teachers had a sign outside his house that said tap dancing lessons and drum lessons. Because tap dancing and drumming, Buddy Rich, Steve Gadd, they all know how to tap dance and play drum. And so I took a lesson from this gentleman, but after one or two lessons, something inside me said, hey, this guy knows how to tap dance better than he knows how to play the snare drum. So I decided that I would tell a little white lie, and I told the gentleman that I could not take any lessons with him anymore because I had a paper route and it interfered with my taking lessons. So that was the second teacher. Huh? The third teacher was a gentleman in a town called in Milton, Pennsylvania. And he was a band director. But during his college days, he took some drum lessons. So he knew what the National Association of Rudimental Drummers was all about. So he could teach me rudiments. So I took lessons from him for maybe 1 year. And then he said to me, John, you need to get a real teacher. He was a trumpet player, I believe. So then he knew of a gentleman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, named Art Harbert, who had a drum shop named Art's Drum Shop. So he said, why don't you contact him and see if he'll give you lessons? The only problem was from Lewisburg to Pittsburgh is around 225 miles.
Whoa.
So that's not good for doing daily or weekly lessons.
That's a hell of a bike ride.
It is. And well, my parents, we met the gentleman in Pittsburgh, and he said, yes, he would do this. What I would have to do is I got on a bus in my hometown, a Greyhound bus, went to Pittsburgh, got a room at the YMCA, and went to his Art's drum shop every day for a week. So I took lessons every day. I hung out, sold drums. I learned how to fix drums. I learned how to talk to drummers. And in those days, Josh, it was very popular with drum shops in big cities where traveling band, the drummers would come in and hang out and talk. And so I would get to meet some of the great drummers of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'd get to meet the traveling drummers. I never met them at the time, but Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa used to hang out at this drum shop. So what I learned was how to play the drums, how to fix the drums, how to talk to drummers. I learned the business of playing drums.
I'm curious. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm curious. You mentioned, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you. I spoke with Michael Rosen the other day, and I've spoken at length with Larry Snyder, my undergrad teacher, and I'm fascinated by the story of what I want to know what it was like when our art form, our art form now, I think you can look at and call PASIC as an institution, right? Like it's now looked at as an organization that is a thing. It wasn't always that way. It used to be just a ragtag group of people like yourself and friends who were like, let's get together and do things. Like it started off very small. And you mentioned the National Association of Rudimental Drummers. And I'm curious, my assumption is like that was like one of the initial attempts at making an organization and trying to, I don't want to say unionize, but like have a body that represents an art form. And I'm curious how far off base I am in that, or if there were other things earlier than the National Association of Rudimental Drummers that made an attempt like that. But that seems to me to be a real focal point for a lot of folks from your generation of like, oh, these are people trying to organize thoughts around what it is I'm doing.
Yes, that was 1933 when the National Association of Rudimental Drummers was organized, and it was because a lot of sloppy teaching. Well, as said, it was a ragtail group. We just did what we could do with what facilities we could find, and I found a house painter who knew how to hold the drumsticks and how to put a skinhead on a flash hoop, and that's how I started. But what it did for me, Josh, was not only teach me how to play the drums, but it taught me how to talk to musicians, how to be a musician. It taught me the business of it. A lot of people can play instruments well, but don't know how to talk to people. But this was something that really helped me, and I'm very happy because when I finally left high school, I went in to the Eastman school not knowing how to play a whole lot of instruments. I was aware of a lot of things that a lot of people today don't know when you go in, because they're into a college, they don't really know the business. And I teach a history of percussion class now at Eastman as an emeritus professor. And I say, how many of you know what the National Association of Rudimental Drummers is all about? And not many people raise their hands because they just never heard of it.
Well, I think, just to be honest, I think I would probably raise my hand halfway and say I know of it, but I don't know much about it. And I think that's a generational thing too. I mean, I know more about, the Pan Trimbago organization in Trinidad that represents steel drummers than I do about the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, and I think that's it speaks a little bit now to the wide diversity in our field. But initially, that was the place. Right. That's where you went to find out information about the Lesson 25 and the Flamacue and all those other things.
Well, what I did during high school was play drum set. I started playing in bars when I was 13 years old. Whoa. There were no rules back in those days.
And you turned out just fine. Look at you. We're all worried about kids these days, and you were hanging out in bars at 13 and getting on Greyhound buses for 200 and some odd miles.
Yes, and I'd stay for a week, so I'd have a lesson for a whole week, and then I'd come back and practice for half a year, and then I'd go back and take another lesson. But what I was learning was all the stuff that Art was teaching me, so that this was a way. Now, I played, as I said, in 13, I was playing in bars. I wanted to be a drum set player. I wanted to play with Count Basie, Duke Ellington, all the big bands, Harry James, and so on. But I was playing almost every weekend in the Moose clubs, the Elks clubs, the American Legions, and then I spent Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, is not too far away from State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is located. So the band I played in, Les Mitchner's big band, we would go on weekends and play like a one-nighter and get home at 3 in the morning. It was about 60 miles away. So we would go there. I was earning money. Now, Les Mitchner, this is something not many people know. And I'm not sure I can pull this off right here, but
Go for it.
he had, Les Mitchner had a wealthy aunt. And at the time, featuring jazz concerts was something that was done. At age 15, I played with Coleman Hawkins. Now, Coleman Hawkins may not mean much to you, but he was the premier saxophone player playing the tune Body and Soul. He was known for that. I have something, I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But can you see everything it says on there?
Move it to your left a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, perfect. Great.
Okay. That was
1948. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be so astonished by the dates. Like I don't want you to feel like I'm astonished by your age. I really love learning about that time, and seeing that, stuff is just way messier
well,
than
that
folks want
that
you to
was
believe.
the time I was known as Johnny Beck. What the drummer sensation? That's what they called me.
Wow, look at you, 13-year-old drummer sensation.
And the band I played in, I don't know, this is the other side of the program.
The Bucknellians?
Was Les Mitchner and the Bucknellians.
Nice.
So that's how I got through as a young teenager. I had no social problems at the time with dating and doing that sort of thing because I was playing weekends. I was always sitting in bars behind a drum set and practicing and going to the state competitions. Each state has their own musical organization that features soloists at a certain time in the spring. And so I was playing snare drum solos, rudimental solos. That's how I got my education. I never really, when I went to Eastman, I had played very little timpani and practically no marimba. But somewhere along the line, this is another thing that happened. Bucknell University always had proms, and the proms would have big bands, Stan Kenton, Les Brown, that sort of thing. So I would go and hang out in the corner somewhere and watch the big band, watch the drummers, talk to them. Even once in a while, they'd let me sit in and play a tune with them. So I was, that was my whole education prior to me going to Eastman in 1951.
Well, I think just to stop you for a second, I think you mentioned a few things earlier. I mean, when I think of places that I cut my teeth in as a young student, like where a lot of my education came from. It's like, yes, I went to Yale, I went to University of Akron, but it's the small clubs in New York for me where the rubber met the road, and I learned of like, oh, that's actually, what works in the practice room doesn't work here, and all of those, those life lessons. And for you mentioned the Elks and the American Legion, and like those were sort of, if I'm not mistaken, more like veteran-based clubs where you could, like my grandfather was a member of the VFW, and we would go every Friday night and have big steak dinners, and everybody's gambling and yelling and hooting and hollering and drinking. And it was like, and I'm 9 years old there with my grandpa and my grandma. He's throwing steaks across the room, and everybody's yelling, and there's a band playing, and everybody's smoking. And those for me are like some of the most memorable childhood things I have, of just like sitting there. Like I was in charge of running numbers for my grandmother back and forth from the person who was selling the numbers to people. Like you could bet a couple bucks. Like I was the one I was in charge of running those numbers back and forth. And for you as a 13-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid, you're in those clubs, but you're playing. And I don't know how much that do the Elks and the American Legion, do they still function like that now in 2020 in terms of the way they functioned then? Do they still serve that same societal purpose?
I don't think so. No, those clubs, that was, in those days, weekends were for people to go dancing, drinking,
Mm-hmm.
smoking, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
hanging out, and bands played. Uh, when I went to Eastman, I did the same routine. Every weekend, I was playing with a band
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. Now, all of that has dried up. None of that type of thing goes along anymore. Now you've got some rock clubs and things like that, but
Yeah.
it's much different now. But you mentioned the smoking, the drinking, the yelling. I have so many funny stories that I remember as a kid between age 13, 14, 15, 16 about playing in clubs and dealing with secondhand comedians, because the circuit then, the good comedians were in Las Vegas and so on, but the the has-beens were in the Oaks and the Eagles in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and they were not very good. But I did learn one thing. Usually, they would come in the day they're going to play. You were given the music of their routine, the dancers, the singers. All the dancers said, "Drummer, catch my bumps. Don't worry, baby, I'll catch your bumps. You just do them for me." And so, uh, we would have a read through at intermission before they come out, and they'd be handed this music. I don't know if you've ever seen those books about how it was playing in clubs. There were certain books. Roy Burns wrote a book, even Sandy Feldstein, about playing in clubs where you have arrows. You could follow this arrow until someone says help, and then go back to another spot in the music where you have to do something else. It was a type of education where almost you by the seat of the pants, and hopefully you made it through without embarrassing anyone. But I have some funny stories. I won't go into them now. That would take too long.
Well, I'm
But
curious. I'm curious for you. I mean, I don't want to jump a bunch of steps here, but when you were talking, as you were talking about the sort of diversity of the folks that were coming across your field of vision as a young kid, and as a musician, from comedians to musicians to veterans, that you were hanging out with, that in 1948, who might have just come back from the war, like you're just hanging around with a bunch of different people, and I'm curious, did that sort of approach early on sort of imprint on you the way that you then dealt with your diverse crew of students that were then coming across your path at Eastman? You had 50 some odd years of totally different people coming across your path. And the one thing I know about people who studied with you is they say that you always left the door open wide enough that folks could grab onto the things they wanted to grab on. Like, I feel like you gave folks enough freedom, and I'm curious if any of that came from your 13-year-old freedom.
yeah, just probably because I do believe that everyone is an individual. To clone someone takes away all the individuality that person has, and they are left with only a skeleton of what they really are. So my feeling for any individual musician is, you teach them what you know, they try what you teach them. If it works, they use it. If not, we keep finding something until we find something that works for them. So freedom to me is very important. Self-instruction is also very important. You need someone to guide you, but until you know what you can do as a player, you're not going to be that great a player. You'll never be your full potential.
There's a part of me that wishes there was if John Beck could start the Eastman School over again, like maybe the freshman and sophomore years of study would just be a whole bunch of clubs that you just make people go hang out in. And then once you get through, like, if you survive those first 2 years, then come talk to me. Then we can figure out what you want to do.
There was one time, the Percussive Arts Society, which of course you know all about, it's like the NARD, National Association of Rudimental Drummers. There was a philosophy going along at the time in the early 60s, when the Percussive Arts Society finally was organized, that we should have a set of rules for, like you said, freshmen. They have to learn to play this. Sophomores have to learn to play that. Juniors have to learn to play that, and so on. I never followed that. I never believed in it. I never advocated it. It could be in my class at the Eastman School, a freshman could be studying something that a senior is also studying. There was no class of this is for this year and so on. I let every individual do what they wanted to do. When they came in to study, I could tell what they wanted to do. And if that was good, I'm not going to mess around with it. I want to teach them the things that they didn't know how to do so well. And then when they put all that together, they become an individual player. And until the player learns what they can do, I don't think they'll reach a full potential.
Well, I think that's a conversation that, you know, I know we're going to do another podcast with Jason, hopefully next week. And one of the things he's always talked about is like he was very heavily influenced by that approach. And I'm just very curious to hear. I would like to hear more about that approach in general in terms of how you dealt with that approach over the course of, you know, things change over 50 years. Like things aren't always, you can't deal with students in year one the way you deal with them in year 50 or whatever. And I'm curious to dig into that more, but I want to back up a little bit to where you decided, like, when did you decide that music was a career you wanted to do? Like during a time post World War II when there was a lot of turmoil in the economy, people were factories were turned over to make tanks. Like, and then you all of a sudden are like, no, I don't want to do industry. I want to do music. Like, was that a weird thing to say out loud then? Like, what was the reaction you got from your friends, your mom and dad's friends? Like, did they think you were absolutely crazy? It's a normal thing to say now because there's an industry that you can, no matter how small it is, there are jobs now. And I'm curious after World War II when like people were coming back and talking about what happened. You're like, yeah, no. I want to play Flammecues.
Yes.
What was that like?
I wanted to be a paradiddle Joe, that sort of thing. Yes, my parents, my father was a businessman. And actually he had an amusement business. They had pinball machines, music machines, cigarette machines, shuffleboard. That was his business. I have a brother younger and a sister younger. I'm the oldest of three. And I told my father once, I said, Dad, I really don't have any interest in your business. I played sports. I played for junior high school basketball, but obviously I was out playing jobs until 2, 3 in the morning. And was I going to be a good basketball player the next day? No, I fell asleep on the bench sometimes. The coach would say, hey, Beck, you want to sleep or you want to play basketball? So I wasn't really a good sportsman. I played in the band for every football game, but I didn't play football or baseball. My brother took the sports. He actually was a catcher for the Detroit baseball team, a minor team. So he took care of that. And I did the music, and I think almost to 100%, people were telling my parents, don't let him be a musician. All they do is smoke, drink, and do drugs. And he's not going, he should be a lawyer or some professional like that.
I don't know. The more we know about lawyers, I think a lot of them smoke and drink and do drugs too.
You're probably right. So they were trying to discourage me or my parents from letting me do this. But I had a band director, and his name was Robert Beckman. Beckman, I don't know where we got the man part, but I was Beck. Any case, he was a smart man. And he told me once, he encouraged my parents to let me continue in music. And so Bob Beckman, the band director, said to me, if you want to go into music, go to the Eastman School of Music and learn how to do this. And I followed his suggestion and went to the Eastman School. But I learned a lot. You know, back in those days, Josh, going back to the 20s, 30s, drummers didn't really study that much. They learned by listening to each other and by trying this and trying that. And it wasn't until maybe in the late 40s, early 50s that we were with the NARD and Percussive Arts Society, seriousness started to show itself in teaching percussion how to play. And so the rest was just listening. That's why improvisation for drummers is easy. It's not so easy for a violinist to improvise, but drummer, hey, that's part of our thing.
Yeah,
And now,
talking to the Nexus folks.
Honest,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, as I get older, now in my 87th year, I don't learn new pieces to play. I just improvise. There's so much going on in my head now. I've done concerts that I've improvised the whole concert. I had a plan, but I would take a certain instrument, and improvisation, I think, it's a lot of fun, and it also relieves all the nervous part, because you can't get nervous if you don't know what you're going to do. So you just go out and you do it. Yeah. And so, well, I can't say, well, I missed that note, but who cares?
Yeah, you got to get better. I mean, it's a skill. Improvisation is a skill just like anything else. You get better at. You get better at getting better at it. And you're talking to the Nexus folks, talking with Russ Hartenberger, he mentions a lot of their initial concerts were improv based, and because they liked it, but B, there just wasn't rep. I mean, there was a little bit. Drumming came in the mix later for a lot of folks in the in the 70s, but there wasn't. It's not like you could just go to Steve Weiss, pick out go to the Percussion Ensemble pages and find a grade 6 piece. Like, that just was not a reality. And so if you wanted to fill a whole 2-hour concert, improvisation was the way to do it. Ionization is great, but it's only 6 minutes. Like, it's not going to fill a whole show for you.
Right. I just played Bill Kahn put together a Nexus improvisation concert at Eastman as part of the Fringe Festival that's held here. And Nexus was there, and a couple other, myself and several other people. And we just improvised for a whole hour, and it was great. The people loved it. It was great. Yeah. You got to think. It does make you think.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the sort of when you got into school at the Eastman School of Music? What was the sort of pedagogy like? What was the thing? What was the gauntlet you were run through as a freshman? I mean, was there a rubric that you had to work your way through? Was there, what was it like as a freshman? You walk in the door. What was your first lesson like?
Let me go back to my audition.
Oh yeah, please.
And because my audition consisted of a rudimental snare drum solo, a little bit of piano, and that was it. I never played snare. I never played timpani or marimba. In fact, the audition was for a theory teacher. That's how I get in. If I could never get into the Eastman School of Music, at that time, or now, let's put it this way, I could not get into the Eastman School of Music based on what I played. I didn't know enough. Yeah. So my first lesson, I didn't meet my teacher at Eastman for about 3 weeks after I was there as a freshman. And we got to know each other. And he was a great man. His name was William Street. And he played timpani in the symphony. And he also taught at the Eastman School. Howard Hansen hired him. And he sort of showed me how to hold the timpani mallets, how to play, how to get sound, how to listen to fourths and fifths. Marimba was mostly string music because there wasn't a whole lot of music written for marimba back in those days. There was no books. So we played a lot of string music. And his main thing, the main thing I got two things from Bill Street was sound. To get a good sound, how to strike the instrument and produce a good quality sound. And the other thing was self-instruction and freedom, like we talked about a little earlier. He let us freedom. He wasn't a taskmaster and saying, well, you had to do this or this or this. He would just keep us going, thinking about quality sound and how how to lift the mallet off the instrument was the sound. And I now, with the rock roll, it's easy to say what I'm going to say, that like timpani playing goes and marimba playing, anything that with quality goes up to the ceiling, and rock and roll goes to the floor. So when you play a note, bam, and that's rock, it's going to the floor. But if you play a nice note on, say, a symphony or something like that, you have to pull that note out of the drum up to the ceiling. Mm. That's the way he was showing us and how to play and also how to be relaxed. You've got to relax. He said, as soon as you feel tension, back off, slow it up, and try to play relaxed. It's a good sound.
What was the percussion ensemble, or let me ask, was there a percussion ensemble sort of curriculum when you got into school? What was that? What was the sort of development of that like?
There was no percussion ensemble. Gordon Peters was at Eastman at the time with me. And of course, Gordon had the influence of Claire Omar Musser and all that sort of thing. No, there was nothing, Josh. We just played, trying to get good sound, quality sound, relax. And we had books that we read from. And he also went from there, we just played the orchestra and the band. There was no percussion ensemble or marimba ensemble. Gordon Peters really started the marimba ensemble in the about 53, 54, somewhere like that. Mm-hmm. But there was no percussion ensemble. And the percussion ensemble didn't start at Eastman in any interest and degree until the I got out of the band in 59 when I came back. Gordon left, went to Chicago, and I went to Eastman. I got a whole story about that too. But in any case, I started the percussion ensemble as a accredited course. Mm-hmm. Up until then, we would get together and play with each other, but there was no music. So there was no percussion ensemble at Eastman until I would guess 1960. Mm. That may be close. It could have been 59, 60s. I'm sure Gordon did a few things also. While I was in the Marine Band from 1955 to 59, Gordon was Eastman getting his degree, and I'm sure he had some kind of percussion ensemble in mind, but there was nothing official.
So when did you join the Marine Band? This is after you graduated from Eastman?
Yes. I joined the Marine Band May 19th, 1955.
And what was what was the reason for joining the Marine Band?
There was a draft. I was 18, I was healthy, and I was going to have to go in the Army. Let me tell you a story, if there's time.
Please, yeah.
About the Eastman School percussion department. My predecessor, William Street, retired in 1968. He was at the Eastman School for 40 years. In 1935, the first percussion graduate of the Eastman School of Music, his name was Oliver Zinsmeister, graduated in 1935 and went into the United States Marine Band and playing along with Charles Owens. Mm-hmm. So Charlie Owen and Ollie Zinsmeister became the two main players of the Marine Band in that period of time, 40 years. And then they went in, Ollie went into the Marine Band in 1935. In 1955, when I graduated from Eastman School, Oliver Zinsmeister was retiring from the Marine Band because it was a 20-year hitch, 20-year commitment. Mm-hmm. And there was an opening then. So I took Oliver Zinsmeister's place in the Marine Band because it was my time now in 55 to take his place. And I went in and stayed in the band for 4 years and got out in 1959. And in that time is when I came back to Eastman to start teaching and playing in the Rochester Philharmonic. So it was 35 to 55, 55 to 59, and then 59 to 2008 when I retired. I was the teacher there at Eastman. So that's the lineage from Bill Street to Oliver Zinsmeister to me to now Michael Burritt.
It's amazing to me how much of if you look at the the symphony orchestra, from the violin to the timpani, like how much of our particular path as drummers, like if you took the military conflicts out of the world altogether, I'm like, it's a sad thing to say, but I don't know that we would be here. Like, it's like the weird unintended consequence of there being a horrible global conflict is that we have to put people in a military. But then part of that is that there's this weird drumming tradition that shot out of it, all the way back from the Civil War, all the way through now. And it's not lost on me that it would be disingenuous of me to say that the military did not have a humongous influence on the development of our craft. Am I off base in making that sort of general statement?
No, you're absolutely right, because a drum, the snare drum, in those days you mentioned the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and the whole Ottoman Empire, where bass drum cymbals that influenced Beethoven, Mozart, that type of thing. So the drum was used in all of those different organizations. So the development of the drum had and war or military had a great influence. They were sort of walked side by side to each other, and each different event or war, or whatever you might call it, produced different requirements for the drum. When the bugle came in like the end of the Second World War, the Civil War, Revolutionary War, the drum was a big deal. But when Second World War came along, the drum sort of took a backseat to the bugle, because now instead of the drum waking up the soldiers, the bugle woke up the soldiers. So it was said that they had a great deal of influence. The size of the drum. The drums during the Revolutionary War were deep, 18 inches deep. And they were deep because the soldiers took their routine, recharge, whatever it was that the signal came from the drum, but it had to be heard. And snares were put on those drums. In the early days, there were no snares, but then the drums started to sound like the cannons. So they put snares on so that they could hear the difference. And the size of the drum, when in the Civil War, was much smaller than the Revolutionary War, because it was a whole different concept of fighting and so on. So yes, the drum had a great deal of influence, or I should say, war had a great deal of influence on the drum.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I'm curious, like, what did you learn being in the military as a drummer that you, like, when you get out of school and then you go back into the the real world for if you're looking at the club, your club days as a 13-year-old, and being in the military as being sort of these bookends to this time when you were in the test tube of school. What did you learn that you in the military that you didn't learn in school in terms of like being a better drummer?
We were playing every day. Every day we had rehearsals, we played concerts. We also did tours, 9-week tours, where we would play for 9 weeks, 2 concerts a day, 7 days a week, no days off. Every day, a new town, and there were no bathrooms on the bus. So,
I love that you threw
so
that in
I,
at the end. Like that's as important detail as everything else.
and there was a lot of beer drinking going on, so you can see the problem those guys were having. So, what did I learn? I learned how to be a musician and handle all the problems and all the excitement and understanding of being a musician and getting along with others, because when you travel 9 weeks on a bus with the same guys all the time, you had to get along. It taught me the business. Now, what did it learn? It learned. I played marimba solos 2 of those tours, so I was playing a solo every day for 9 weeks, two of the years. It, it it taught me how to be a musician, how to feel and think and get along with others. Musically, it also showed me different styles of playing, because the band in those days did a lot of transcriptions. So we were playing the same percussion parts as maybe a lot of the classical pieces that we played. Um, I guess it just gave me the feeling that I like this business. I want to be a musician. I enjoy it. I like to play music with others, for others. That was a great way for me to earn a living. And then when I finally got the job at Eastman, I looked further ahead and I could say, hey, this is my life. The band I had to join, or I had to go into service. So at the time, there were 15 Eastman students in the United States Marine Band at that time, 1951 to 55, because we all had the draft. We were all faced with that. But it was fun. I got to know a lot of people, hang out with a lot of people, have a good time, play concerts every day. Where sometimes showed me how to play when maybe I didn't have much sleep, but I still could play. And playing a solo every day for 9 weeks. The tour sort of looked like the stock market does sometimes. The tour started in one day, and then it would get more and more exciting, and the curve would go way up. Then you'd hit a plateau, maybe about the 4th or 5th week out, and the plateau would stay there for a while, and then you started going down. You're getting bored with all this, and then in the last week, that would go up again because you knew the tour was going to be over. And it just gave me chops, really. I called them tour chops, because when you come back after 9 weeks of playing every day, you develop strong chops.
Well, you get. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I'm only 40, and I've only been in So Percussion. This is coming up on my 16th year, and there are things in my 16th year now with So that I'm like, oh man, this is so easy. This thing is now so easy. But 16 years ago, it felt like I was bench pressing 300 pounds, and it's like running.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. As you get more at bats, you get better at hitting home runs. Now steroids helped Mark McGwire too, but he still had to get better. Steroids don't help you put the bat on the ball. And he just did that thousands of times. You look at Michael Jordan and you're like, oh, well, he's a genius. No, he shot 40,000 free throws. That's why he's really good. He played a game with the flu or with food poisoning. That's why he's good. It's because he knew how to do it, And as you're talking about your experience as a 13-year-old in the Marine Band, like what I hear is at bats. I hear, like, I'm sure they weren't all amazing gigs. I'm sure you walked out there and fell on your face a few times. I'm guessing, if you're a human being like I am,
Yeah.
And
there were those days in there, yes.
And I just think it's something that, like, and I want to ask you this question, even though I'm giving you the answer. I kind of feel like I want to hear, but so I'm putting that out there. But but I want to hear honestly, like, what do you feel is something that students are missing, that you feel like you have to keep saying over and over again? For me, it's that concept of, like, you're not going to get this today. Like, why don't you trust me that you're not going to have a good snare drum roll by tomorrow? Like, it's not possible. Just trust me. It's going to take years. You're not going to be an amazing steel drummer overnight. And in fact, that's not my goal. If it was, that would be wrong of me. My goal is to get you to learn how to get better at something. And I'm curious for you, like, what was the thing after 50 years that you felt like, oh my God, if I could just put this on a record and have it playing nonstop, I could move on with my life as a teacher?
Well, if I decided that's what I wanted to do, then there'd be no incentive for me to continue to play. I still practice every day. Mm-hmm. In fact, Josh, I practiced a half an hour before I did this little interview with you.
You were making me feel horrible about myself. I drank coffee and checked my email like a loser.
Well, at my age, at 87, the muscles don't act like they used to at 27. Yeah. So my goal is self-preservation. I guess that's one way. I want to keep these muscles going as long as I can. I can't play snare drum now as fast as I used to, but I can still get a pretty good sound on the drum, and that's important. I don't have to play as fast as I used to anyway. So I just want to keep developing this thing that's gotten me through my career, and I want to finish with the quality that I think I still have in me.
Yeah, I've always looked at folks like yourself, or Larry Snyder, or Mike Rosen, or Steve Schick, or Evelyn Glenn. It doesn't matter who it is, and I don't have to always enjoy necessarily the piece of music they are playing or whatever. But I've always been jealous a bit, like, damn it, John Beck. He may not have the hands that I have, but he knows what he's going to sound like before I do. And I don't always know how I'm going to sound before I make a sound, and you do, at least more than I do, and it's because you've just made that motion more, and that's the sort of like my soft underbelly of jealousy is just like, like, why can't I have the confidence of an 87-year-old man, but the hands of a 40-year-old person? Maybe that's the human dilemma that we're all struggling with, but.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Hopefully I know what it's going to sound like when I strike, but sometimes, Josh, it doesn't, and then that says to me, "Hey, look, I know it's in there. I got to find it again and get it out."
Well, I think that's a lovely place to stop. Like I just the optimism that you like, the sort of self-awareness you kept talking. You kept mentioning self-instruction. And like I hear that, and the words I hear in my head are self-awareness. Like, you are aware about yourself as a player. You know where your weaknesses are. You know where your lazy spots are. You know where, like, the moment that in 20 minutes you're going to give up because you just want to, not because you have a good reason. Like, and I think it's important for students to self-police themselves a little bit and just hold themselves accountable. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. It feels to me like that's something you've really pushed from day one. And I'm really grateful for it, and I'm really grateful for this hour, JB. It's I love talking to people I've never spoken to really at all, and I really, really have enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next chat with Jason, sort of doing a part 2 to hear a lot more in depth about your time at Eastman and sort of your methodology in building that program, and I want to hear more in depth about that. But before I let you go. Again, thank you. But is there any links or recommendations of something you would suggest to young listeners of this podcast to sort of like, I want to know more about just sort of what he's thinking and music he loves? What would you recommend for folks to start with? Is there a website? Is there a link? Is there a piece of yours that is like, man, this is the thing folks need to listen to?
Well, I'm not sure I have a specific piece that would help them get what they're after. But I think what the real important thing, and I try to encourage young students to do this, is to learn what they can do. Play like you think you can do. And don't try to play like someone else. Don't compete. You're playing, say, well, I can play faster than you. No, that's silly. But just play the way you want to play, the way it feels good. Many times I would say to someone, what's it feel like, in you when you play this. I don't know what it feels like inside of them. They know what it feels like. And if it says, now it sounds good. So whatever you're feeling inside of you at this moment is what you should try to do every day when you play. That's the important thing. Try to play like you can play. And once you feel confident and comfortable with what you do, then that's you. That becomes you and not someone else. That's, I think, very important.
I think that's amazing advice to leave it on. And I think you should start a website, just johnbeckjb.com. And all it is a quote that just says, play it the way that feels best to you. Like that's all it is on the website.
That's it.
I think that would be a lovely place for folks to check out. But JB, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch about part 2 with Jason. In the meantime, I hope you stay safe and healthy. You have something else you want to say?
Well, yeah. Quote was what you just said about Steve Gadd. Of course, I've known Steve since he's 14 years old. Mm-hmm. He lives in Rochester. I talked to him last week. In any case, I said, Steve, you practice every day. And he said, this is many years ago, he said this. He said, well, yeah, I usually do this. I pick up the sticks, strike the drum, and if it feels good, I don't practice anymore. and if it doesn't feel good, then I practice a little bit. So it's the feeling inside of you that's the important thing.
That's amazing. Well, I appreciate that very much, John. And we'll be in touch about the next time. Please stay safe and be healthy and try to stay sane during this quarantine if you can. Okay.
Okay. And Josh, I really enjoyed speaking with you. You're easy to talk to. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for your questions and getting me through.
You're quite welcome. The feeling is mutual, and I look forward to doing it again. All right. Well, thanks, JB. Take care.
Okay.
And we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.